Got a quick set of notes here, just in case you missed it, on Japanese internment during World War II and the dropping of the atomic bomb to end World War II. And remember, our goal was to gain basic understanding of two important moral issues concerning the United States' involvement in World War II. Now, you've probably selected one of these topics or the other for your debate. I'm going to go briefly through some details about both, and you can really only watch the part or only have to watch the part that pertains to your subject that you selected. First of all, when we're talking about interned, the question comes up who was interned, meaning who was considered a combatant and who was put into a camp. Well, as far as Italians go, remember Italy was an enemy of the United States during World War II. 1,521 enemy aliens were interned. Now, an enemy alien is someone who's living in this country that is not a citizen, and at the time they're living here, their country goes to war with the United States. So there were Italian aliens living in the United States, non citizens, and when Italy goes to war with the United States, they become enemy aliens. Same is true of the Germans. 11,000 enemy aliens, meaning non citizens, were interned. The Japanese, on the other hand, there were 110,000 Japanese interned. 62% of them were not aliens. They were U.S. citizens, which means 38% were, excuse me, enemy aliens, but definitely a difference there. The order that led to the internment of the Japanese was Executive Order 9066, passed by Roosevelt. It basically said this: whereas the successful prosecution of the war requires every possible protection against espionage, which is spying, gathering information for an enemy of the United States, and against sabotage. This would mean destroying government property in any way to try to slow down or derail or stop the war effort. It could mean bombing a factory. It could mean slowing down work in a factory, whatever would keep us from fighting at our best. So against sabotage and espionage to national defense material, national defense premises, meaning places, and national defense utilities. All of those things were a part of Executive Order 9066, and the idea was to intern Japanese so they could not do those things. This brings us to the Fifth Amendment, which is the legal basis for internment, and it's also the legal basis against internment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So, meaning you're not supposed to be held in a trial or, in a prison or camp unless you had a formal indictment. And in this case, the Japanese that were interned did not. But then it goes on to say, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service, and then it says in a time of war or just general public danger. So it might be pointing out an exception here to the rule that yes, normally you would have a grand jury or an indictment, but in times of war or when the public is in danger, maybe we suspend that rule. Then it goes on to say some other things about double jeopardy and that you can't be compelled in any criminal case to bear witness against themselves. And then at the end here, it's kind of interesting. It says, nor shall anyone be deprived of life, liberty, without the due process of law, which would mean the court system. And again, the Japanese were deprived of some of their rights without going into a court. So it's really confusing here. It does seem to suggest that there's an exception to trial rules with public danger, but then it also says you can't be deprived of your life, liberty, or property without due process of law, which refers to courts and trials. The camp locations are listed here. You can see most of them are out west or in isolated areas, right? That was the idea, put them away from population centers. And over here, you have the exact numbers of Japanese that were interned, just for your reference. This is a video on internment. I'm not going to play it right now, but you can go back and watch it. It's an interview with a man who was interned, and it goes more in depth on what internment was. On to the atomic bomb. Also known as the Manhattan Project. And this doesn't involve combatants involved. It involves weapons used. I know I have a quick YouTube video showing the detonation of an atomic bomb, like what it looks like. The first A-bomb test was 20 kilotons, 20,000 tons of explosive material or of TNT, which is dynamite. It created a 100-mile shockwave blast and a mushroom cloud that went 7.5 miles up into the air. And again, that was our first test of an atomic device. The Germans did have an atomic program that they started in 1939. Many of the participants in their bomb program were drafted in the army, so they couldn't continue the program. They started again in 42 trying to develop their atomic bomb, but most of their leading physicists had left the country. Some of them were Jewish, some of them just disagreed with Hitler, but they had gotten out. As far as the U.S. Side of things, at this time, we are fighting a war in Asia against Japan. The Battle of Okinawa lasts 82 days, and 12,000 Americans were killed, 100,000 Japanese were killed, 150,000 Okinawan civilians die. The idea was that as we were taking over these islands, getting closer to Japan, and Okinawa is right here, it's kind of the last stop before you invade Japan, that the casualties would continue to go up. And there were estimates about casualties if the United States invaded Japan, 1.7 to 4 million, or maybe 5 to 10 million Japanese civilians. And this idea that the Japanese civilians were trained to defend the homeland, the body count would be massive. We bring this up because it's one of the things the government was thinking about when they made their decision to drop the bomb on Japan, that it might actually cost less lives than an invasion. Some of the effects of the firebombing of Tokyo versus the Hiroshima effects and the Hiroshima effects. The firebomb of Tokyo was traditional bombing that took place before the dropping of the atomic bomb. It was on March 9th and 10th in 1945. There were 100,000 casualties estimated from this really one night raid of planes over Tokyo. It left 1 million people homeless, 40 square kilometers burned to the ground, completely gone. In contrast, the Hiroshima bombing, which also occurred in one day, killed 70 to 80,000 people, again, less than the 100,000. A lot of them were killed by what's called a firestorm. 70,000 were injured in that bombing. Oh, let me go back one slide here if I can. Oh, we'll try again. But 70,000 were injured, and again, there was a significant loss of property. This is an aerial view of Hiroshima. Just gives you an idea of what it did. You can see very few buildings still standing. And we'll get here to the last slide. And again, we have a video here talking about that attack. So if you want to watch that, perhaps you could. Again, this is just some general information about the bombing of Hiroshima and internment to get you thinking about your debate topic. Thank you.